Chapter 8. The aroma of strawberries and freshly baked pastries filled Peacemaker's nose as he reached for the freshly baked pie in the oven and pulled out the finished strawberry pie. After taking a moment to examine the golden brown surface of the pie's crust, in order to give him an indication if the pie was finished or required more time to bake in one of the ovens of the Academy kitchens. Once the surface had been examined, Peacemaker walked over to a table in the center of the kitchens and placed the pie on a tray, covered with other sweets he had made within the last hour, such as cookies and juice for his winglet. This being a day off from classes and the last day of the quarter, Peacemaker wanted to take the opportunity to do something for his winglet before they found out the results of their end-of-quarter tests in a few days. What better way than to put his talents to good use and make food he was sure his winglet would enjoy? Or, at the very least, take his mind off the nightmare he had had the night before. Thinking of the dream caused Peacemaker to feel his spine and wings shiver, almost like he was actually in the Ice Kingdom again. But the warmth of the food he had prepared reminded him he was still in Jade Mountain, far, far away from the home of the Ice Wings, a place he had never been to in his life, and he hoped he would never see. Not after seeing dead Ice Wings and a dream version of Ermine threatening to kill him while mourning her brother. Despite Cliff wanting to talk about Peacemaker's nightmare and be there for him, Peacemaker had made it his mission that entire day to avoid the Skywing Prince, whom he considered his most trusted and best friend in the Academy. He appreciated Cliff wanting to be there, but the last thing Peacemaker wanted to speak or think about was his dreams. He wanted to avoid the dreams as much as possible, even the one with the black and white Nightwing. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Peacemaker blinked in surprise as he heard the noise in front of him. Looking at the tray of pastries, Peacemaker noticed that, originally, there had been 35 cookies, 5 for each winglet member. Now, there was 33. Tilting his head, Peacemaker wondered if he had miscalculated. And then he heard a noise just outside the kitchen. A belch. Raising a brow, Peacemaker approached the kitchen cave entrance and saw Hyena standing to the side. Standing up straight, rather hurriedly, grinning at him. "Oh, hi, Peacemaker," the Sandwing said, cheerfully. "How's your afternoon?" "Fine," Peacemaker began, slowly squinting his eyes, noticing a crumb on the side of her maw. "Did you just have a cookie?" "What makes you think that?" Hyena answered, neutrally, until Peacemaker made a motion with his thumb talon, rubbing the corner of his own maw. Hyena mirrored and wiped off the crumb. She gave a sheepish grin. Raising a brow, Peacemaker understood what happened, especially after he could have sworn he heard talons clicking on the ground beside him, despite no one, seemingly, standing there. "There are 33 cookies left, Jaguar," Peacemaker spoke casually. "Originally, there was supposed to be 5 for each of us. You can each have 4 more, or we can eat them together as a winglet." To his right, Peacemaker saw the camouflage of a Rainwing end. Sitting beside him, Jaguar looked at Peacemaker with a small frown. "How did you know?" Jaguar asked curiously. "Well, I was always good at playing hide-and-seek in the rainforest," Peacemaker said, smiling. "I was always the seeker. Besides, you eating a cookie in the kitchen gave it away." Jaguar sighed, defeated, but shrugged. "We can wait, I guess," Jaguar said as he walked out of the kitchen and off to wherever he was going. Hyena, before leaving, looked back at Peacemaker and smiled. "Can't wait to try more in the common cave." With that, Peacemaker was alone again. But just to make sure Jaguar was not going to come back and sneak up on him, in order to sneak a cookie off of the platter, he made sure to stand perfectly still and keep his ears focused on the sound of any talons scraping against the cave floor. After a few seconds of waiting, this time, Peacemaker was certain he was alone. Smiling at the thought of Hyena and Jaguar's antics, Peacemaker shook his head as he walked through the caves of the academy. Those two were troublemakers, though they were never malicious. While Peacemaker would never do the harebrained schemes Jaguar and Hyena pulled, he appreciated both the Rainwing and the Sandwing, like he did the rest of the Winglet. This last month, Peacemaker had come to appreciate each of his Winglet members. He was nervous about first coming to the academy when he got his acceptance scroll, but things had turned out alright so far. While he wished his nights could be better, the day was, in more ways than one, brighter when he went to class and spent time with the Winglet. The bronze gong rang in the distance, confirming that it was the afternoon. If Peacemaker timed everything right, he could get back to the common cave before the Court's Winglet converged, and have the food and drinks set up for everyone just as they arrived. Wasting no time, Peacemaker picked up the tray of food and quickly made his way out of the kitchen and through the tunnels that stretched throughout the academy, heading back toward the Court's Winglet's common cave. At this time of day, the area of the academy where the kitchens were located tended to be less crowded, as students would either be outside flying, hunting, or, for the Seawings most of the time, near the underground lake for a swim before the evening meals and eventual call to return to common caves. The fewer dragons encountered as he carried the snacks would be better, as he would not need to maneuver around crowds of dragons. All he needed to do was get everything to the common cave, and then Peacemaker could go about the rest of the day before the evening snack. But a voice from a nearby study cave stopped Peacemaker in his tracks as he passed.
"Better watch your tongue, outsider, or I will stomp it for you,"
a voice snarled.
"That is not an opinion, Goal. It is only a fact,"
another voice spoke. Peacemaker's ears perked when he recognized the owner. It was Tempest. Peering around the corner of the cave entrance, Peacemaker noticed that Tempest was with 3 other Seawings. One's scales were a darker shade of green compared to Tempest's light green ones, while the others were blue. The darker blue Seawing, whom Peacemaker recognized as Goal, was glaring at Tempest from across a table while the latter had been studying. Based on Goal's expression, he looked just about ready to lunge at her.
"Princess Eclipse is the Queen's heir,"
Goal growled at Tempest, who stayed calm despite the Seawing's outburst towards her.
"That is who she hopes succeeds her,"
Tempest responded calmly, though, from where Peacemaker could see, one of her talons below the table dug into the floor.
"But it is important to remember, Queen Coral has 32 sons, many of whom are married. Some have daughters of their own."
"They..."
"Correct me if I am wrong, Goal,"
Tempest interrupted the Seawing.
"But has Queen Coral changed the law of succession? Has she changed it where her own granddaughters cannot challenge her?"
If looks could kill, Peacemaker thought that Tempest would have been turned to ash by Goal's expression. Peacemaker did not know the details of the argument, but it was abundantly clear that Goal was a fierce supporter of Queen Coral. If he remembered correctly, Peacemaker recalled how Tempest did not voice admiration for the Queen of the Seawings, and was neutral about her when mentioned on the first day of school. His mother had told him about the rumors of how many of Queen Coral's granddaughters from her many sons were interested in challenging the current queen to the throne. It made him wonder why Princess Eclipse, Coral's preferred heir, was not defending her closest right to the throne.
"You know a lot for a non-kingdom Seawing,"
Goal growled. Tempest leaned forward, her snout mere inches from her fellow Seawing.
"My mother knows a lot about her home, even if she does not live in the kingdom itself anymore."
Tempest stood up from her seat, collecting her belongings into her bag.
"It's funny how I, someone who does not live in the kingdom, knows a lot more about its policies than you do, Goal.
Goal looked ready to lunge at Tempest. Peacemaker was ready to drop his everything and rush to her. But before Goal could step forward, the two other Sea-Wing students stepped before the two.
"That's enough,"
spoke the dark green Sea-Wing.
"Let it go."
"Shut up, Mako. She is mocking the Queen,"
Goal snarled.
"She had only spoken the truth,"
Mako answered, holding back Goal.
"I don't agree with her, but she's right. Let it go."
Goal's glare turned back on Tempest, whose eyes stared back into his.
"You seem tired, Goal,"
Tempest spoke as she stepped away from the table.
"Get some rest before you debate me."
Peacemaker noted that Goal did seem a little exhausted, based on how his wings were drooping to his side. Even if he wanted to yell and debate with Tempest, he did not look like he had the willpower for it. As Tempest left the cave, Peacemaker backed away as she was about to turn the corner he was peering behind. When the two made eye contact, Tempest almost bumped into him, nearly losing his train in the process.
"I'm sorry, Peacemaker,"
Tempest apologized.
"I didn't know you were there."
"My fault for eavesdropping," Peacemaker admitted, sheepishly. Glancing back at the study cave for a moment, Tempest looked back at Peacemaker.
"Come on, let's just get out of here,"
Tempest said, going in the same direction Peacemaker was heading, despite initially going in the opposite. He speculated Tempest just wanted to get away from the cave she had been in. If she needed to talk with someone, or just be with someone who would not yell at her, then Peacemaker was happy to oblige. He hated getting into fights with other dragons. It was always tiresome when it ended, and it was difficult to keep your thoughts in afterwards. He always found it nice to have someone close by to talk to while he vented about an argument he may have had. For the longest time, Peacemaker and Tempest walked in silence. The scraping of their talons and the slithering of their tails against the stone floor was all that could be heard between the two. Peacemaker wanted to start a conversation with the Sea-Wing, but the frown on her face confirmed she was not interested in talking about her argument with Gull. Yet, anyways. Finally, the two reached the quartz winglet common cave and entered the privacy of the cave. As Peacemaker placed the tray of snacks on a table near the corner of the common cave, Tempest had laid on a cushion close to the extinguished fire pit. She curled up into a tight ball, resting her head on the floor, groaning. Biting his lip, Peacemaker asked, "Are you all right, Tempest?" At first, he thought Tempest might not have hurt him, as she gave no inclination she had. She held up her talons and raised her thumb up.
"Perfect. Never better."
She sighed as she lay on the floor. Peacemaker did not need mind-reading powers to tell she was lying. Frowning, Peacemaker sat on a cushion the opposite side of her. Reaching into his pouch, he pulled out a scroll from the library and opened it up to read. As he did, Tempest raised her head, tiredly, to look at him.
"I'm sorry,"
Tempest responded, rubbing her eyes as she sat back up.
"That was rude."
"You just got out of a heated debate," Peacemaker said.
"Naturally, you would be tired."
Tempest sighed, but nodded at his assessment.
"It wasn't a conversation I was part of," she admitted, "but Gull kept spouting off false information. And I corrected him."
She paused before nodding to herself.
"Maybe a little too harshly."
"Don't like Gull?" Peacemaker asked. While he did not know Gull personally, he did know that the Sea-Wing from the Silver Winglet was enthusiastic and proud when it came to his work.
"It's not like that,"
Tempest responded.
"He's a good dragon. Very loyal."
Lowering her head so it lay on her talons, Tempest closed her eyes for a moment.
"But that loyalty sometimes prevents him from seeing the bigger picture, especially when his patriotism gets involved. When I pointed out that Princess Auklet was not the only one who could become Queen of the Sea Kingdom, he got angry, thinking I was bad-mouthing Queen Coral.
I thought you didn't like Queen Coral? Peacemaker asked, raising a brow. Tempest opened her eyes and raised her head slowly, yawning.
I don't hate her, Tempest answered, but I do not think she is a wise queen. Having grown up outside of the Sea Kingdom and along the villages of the coast, I have heard from other Seawings how Coral can be. Seawings like Gull, who live in the kingdom itself, are very loyal to Queen Coral, sometimes to the point they think she could do no wrong.
Peacemaker nodded. While he was born only shortly after the Sandwing War of Succession, Peacemaker knew how she was influenced by Blister, oblivious to the things that happened within her kingdom, and how she had been obsessed with having a daughter that would succeed her while not focusing on her sons. His mother told him that while Coral's sons never harbored resentment towards their mother for the lack of attention they received, those sons who had daughters of their own were a different matter entirely. With many granddaughters who were interested in challenging Queen Coral to the throne, this would create problems not just for Coral, but for the Sea Kingdom when a new queen would be crowned. It sounded like Gull, and many of the Seawings living in Kingdom territory, did not want to think about the idea of so many princesses having a claim to the throne, maybe even starting a long and bloody contest between cousins, all of whom had as much right to the throne as the other. Not wanting to delve into a topic that Tempest had so hotly debated with the Seawings, Peacemaker focused on switching the conversation to something related to Tempest. You said you were born outside of the Sea Kingdom? Peacemaker asked, genuinely curious. At this, Tempest seemed to wake up a bit more.
Yeah,
she answered, showing some enthusiasm.
Aderin.
Aderin? Peacemaker asked, raising a brow. Where is that?
It is a very small island south of the rainforest, Tempest replied. Queen Glory gave it to the Seawings in hopes of expanding ties with the Kingdom of the Sea.
And it's named after King Adder? Peacemaker asked, recognizing the name of Queen Anaconda's mate in the name of the island. Tempest nodded, smiling at how he caught on.
Yes, despite being a Seawing village, our leaders wanted to respect Queen Glory by naming it after one of her ancestors.
Is that why you suggested doing the project on Queen Anaconda? Peacemaker asked. Tempest responded with a smile and a wink.
Maybe, she answered, but Queen Anaconda is a lesser-known ruler. I meant what I said about that.
At that, Peacemaker could agree upon. It was nice to do research on Queen Anaconda, and how she fiercely protected her tribe and the Rainforest Kingdom from tribes that wanted to extort the forest resources. Tempest's suggestion for the project on Queen Anaconda made sense as well, considering she had lived on an island named after Anaconda's husband. The next half an hour, Peacemaker and Tempest spoke with each other about the others' lives in the different sections of the rainforest. After Tempest described her life on Aderin, how she and her brothers memorized the surrounding ocean around the island and the rainforest's southern border, she asked Peacemaker about his parentage, accurately guessing that his mother and father had met before the unification of the Rainwing and Nightwing tribes under Queen Glory's rule, as he had only been a few months old when the Nightwing tribe's island had been destroyed by the volcano. Peacemaker had explained how his parents were both unsatisfied with their tribes during that period of time, and had each left when they had turned 6. According to his mother, Hope had met Peacemaker's father, Boa, in between the rainforest and Jade Mountain a year and a half before his birth. They traveled for some time before developing feelings for the other, and eventually, Hope was with the egg that Peacemaker would hatch from. Sadly, months before his birth, Boa had contracted a chest disease and had passed away before Peacemaker hatched. Eventually, as the conversation between Tempest and Peacemaker drew on for a long while, the scraping of talons on the floor and slithering tails confirmed the incoming arrival of the rest of the court's winglet. as everyone was about to go about their afternoon business in the common cave, it was Cliff who was first to notice the tray of sweets that Peacemaker had laid out in the center of the gathering area.
Whoa, Peacemaker, you make all that?
Cliff asked, blinking in surprise at the pie and the cookies that Peacemaker had made. Peacemaker smiled as Ermine and Alligator looked, both surprised at the food laid out. Meanwhile, Hyena and Jaguar looked at each other with grins, having already known about the treats previously. "Yup," Peacemaker said, grinning happily as the rest of the winglet joined him and Tempest in the center of the cave. "The end of the quarter is today, and we'll be finding out how we did at the end of the quarter tests in a couple days."
Ah, don't remind me,
Cliff said, rolling his eyes at the news. Though Peacemaker had a feeling his friend had done fine. "Let's just say, this is to celebrate," Peacemaker said. "Regardless of how we did, we made it to the end of the first quarter of our year. We still have a long ways to go, but we should celebrate the progress we made, right?" At this, the others, even Ermine, nodded in agreement. "Normally, I would say save this for the end of the semester or the year," Ermine said as she approached the center of the cave and plucked up a cookie. Then she smiled at Peacemaker and to the others. "But I think, for the end of our first quarter, this warrants a small amount of enjoyment." "What she means is," Tempest began, standing up beside Ermine and picking a cookie up while looking back to Peacemaker. "Thank you, Peacemaker." When everyone walked to the center to grab a cookie, each member of the winglet looked at Peacemaker and smiled in his direction as they began to snack on the treats he had made. Resisting the urge to blush, Peacemaker grinned as he reached out to pick up a cookie and join his winglet. Indeed, Ermine was right that their time at the academy was only beginning. But despite the short time that had passed, Peacemaker enjoyed the company he had with him in attending the academy. And he hoped that the days would only get better. Hours later, as the quartz winglet entered their sleeping caves for the night, after bidding each other a good evening, Peacemaker rested on his bed, curled in a tight ball. While sleep would take the rest of his friends, Peacemaker resisted the pull that sleep had on his mind and body. Like he did every night for several weeks, he feared what his dreams would show him. When sleep's pull on his body grew stronger, he clutched his talons into his scalp, digging his claws into his scalp, threatening to draw blood, as his eyes were beginning to grow heavy.
"I have something to show you,"
a voice hissed in his mind, as his eyes felt as heavy as mountains. "No," Peacemaker whimpered to the voice in his mind.
"Shh," it hissed. "Come."
Then there was nothing. Darkness. Darkness completely embraced Peacemaker, almost like he had been pushed into the deepest lake imaginable. A chill surrounded him as he drifted through the darkness aimlessly. With his talons, Peacemaker attempted to push himself through the darkness in order to find any light. "Hello?" Peacemaker attempted to speak, but he could not even hear his own voice. But there was a voice he heard, and it echoed through Peacemaker's ears. "Maybe it started the first time you lied to me." The voice, so distant, yet so familiar. Peacemaker spun through the darkness, trying to see if he could find where the voice was coming from. "Hello?" Peacemaker called again out into the darkness, but his voice still could not breach the abyss that surrounded him. Yet, what he had done had some effect, as the darkness suddenly vanished. Now, Peacemaker was standing on a small cliff, somewhere in the mountains of Pyria. Where exactly, he was not sure. But something in the back of his mind nagged at him, telling him he should remember it, almost like he had spent most of his life here. Despite this feeling, Peacemaker realized he was not alone,
as the sound of the clicking of talons could be heard from above. Looking in that direction, he saw the tail of a dragon going into a cave behind him, having managed to go inside while he had been looking out at the night sky. Or maybe it was losing False Layer and not being able to do anything about it. The voice from before echoed through his mind. This time, the voice, a female's, resonated inside Peacemaker. He recognized the sound of the owner's voice. But where? Wait! Peacemaker called out after the dragon that had just entered the cave, chasing after her. Maybe it was all the small moments where you felt threatened or powerless, or out of control, and all the things you did to fight those feelings. The voice was much clearer, and the words ripped into Peacemaker's heart like a spear of ice, causing him to stumble out of his run and fall onto the stone floor of the cave. Clutching his chest, Peacemaker felt his heart beat painfully. Biting it back, he pushed himself back up and walked into the cave, where he could now see the dragon, a Nightwing. Slowly, Peacemaker approached the dragon, holding up his talons out to her shoulder. Who are you? Or maybe it's just part of you, something you hatched with. Slowly, the Nightwing turned to face him. As she did, Peacemaker could see dark, purple eyes. Maybe that's what you really got from your father, along with your magic.
I will kill you!
Peacemaker screamed as serrated talons slashed across his face. Falling backward, Peacemaker heard massive footsteps move towards him as he struggled to stand back up. Looking up at his attacker, Peacemaker's eyes widened and his heart fell when he saw an adult Icewing stand before him. The Icewing was bleeding profusely from his eyes and a massive hole that was ripped into his stomach. No! No! Peacemaker whispered, recognizing the Icewing, the one who had tormented his dreams, the one he had ordered to kill himself. The Icewing, through his blooded eyes, looked at him with a dead gaze. But while there was no life in them, the dragon's body still moved with a will of its own as it stalked closer to him. Scrambling away, Peacemaker desperately attempted to open his wings and fly. But the Icewing had closed the distance with ruthless speed and tore his serrated claws into Peacemaker's wings. Screaming in agony, Peacemaker hugged his ruined wings closer to him. I'm sorry! Peacemaker pleaded to the Icewing as it towered over him, placing its serrated talons over his throat. I'm sorry! Peace. Peacemaker! The Icewing's body suddenly ceased, frozen. Peacemaker, through the blood that covered his brow and eyes, blinked in shock at the Icewing that now stood above him like a statue, the edges of his claws no longer threatening to cut his throat. Wake up, Peacemaker! Grinding his teeth together, Peacemaker pulled himself away from the Icewing's claws. Despite his scales touching the claws, Peacemaker's throat almost seemed to phase through the Icewing's clutches, almost like they were not even there. And the pain. Looking at his wings and feeling his face, Peacemaker felt no injury. He was unscathed. Peacemaker, listen to me. You need to open your eyes. Slowly, Peacemaker's eyes opened as he struggled against how heavy his eyelids were feeling. The feeling of talons shaking his shoulders helped him gain the strength to open them. His heart beat rapidly in his chest, painfully. Below him, Peacemaker no longer felt his bed. He felt something uncomfortable and cold beneath him. Above him, he saw 3 figures, one aqua green, one red, and the other yellow and black. Peacemaker, Stay awake! A voice spoke to him. A female. Where did he recognize that voice? Did he know? Oh.
Tempest?
Peacemaker spoke, tiredly, his mind struggling to stay awake. Peacemaker, listen! Keep your eyes open! He heard Tempest's voice say to him.
What's happening?
Another voice spoke. This one Peacemaker recognized. Who did it belong to again?
I'm getting an adult,
came another voice Peacemaker recognized. No, Tempest's voice spoke. Let me handle this.
Tempest? What are you talking about?
Peacemaker felt his eyes start to close, and his mind begin to fade. No! No, no! Peace! That's all he heard from one of the voices, as Peacemaker drowned back into the darkness. Peacemaker's eyes opened again to see the darkness surrounding him, but this time he was not alone. This time the Icewing was with him. His talons wrapped around Peacemaker's throat, and his jaws opened wide with the intent of biting his throat out. Screaming, Peacemaker attempted to push the dragon off of him. "Leave me alone!" Peacemaker cried, beating the monstrous Nightwing with his tail, talons, and wings. Anything he could use to knock the dragon off of him. "I'm sorry!"
I will kill you!
The dragon screamed, ignoring Peacemaker's pleads.
For everything you took!
Together, the two sank into the darkness. Slowly, Peacemaker felt his chest start to hurt and his mind start to fade. The Icewing's muzzle slowly edged close to Peacemaker's ear, and he whispered slowly,
I will watch you both sink.
His resistance starting to lessen, Peacemaker felt his entire body start to grow numb, and the darkness began to completely consume him. Peacemaker! An agonized roar filled Peacemaker's ears, just as the older dragon's talons released his throat. Sensation returning to his body, Peacemaker opened his eyes, expecting to see darkness around him. But instead, above the abyss that threatened to consume him, he saw gray light in the darkness, followed by a green light that floated down towards him, growing bigger as it approached him. Once the green light was in front of him, Peacemaker felt the pair of talons reach out to grab his own tightly. Staring into the green light, Peacemaker saw a pair of amber eyes staring back into his blue ones. Peacemaker! The voice whispered into his mind with a soothing tone, unlike the Icewing's voice. Slowly, the individual began to lift Peacemaker away from the darkness and towards the gray light in the distance.
No!
Roared a voice below them both. Sparing a glance as the individual in the green light lifted him upwards, Peacemaker saw the darkness below him move. A pair of amber-colored orbs drew closer to him. Whoever his savior was knew what was happening and quickly sped up Peacemaker's ascent. As the shadowy figure drew close, the individual of green light held out one of their talons. A bright flash of emerald light lit up the darkness and caused a savage roar to echo through Peacemaker's ears. But that did not stop shadowy figure's advance. A pair of strong talons wrapped themselves around Peacemaker's legs and yanked him from the individual in green light. Peacemaker! The figure shouted, just barely missing Peacemaker's talons. In the talons of the shadowy figure, Peacemaker stared fearfully into a pair of amber-colored eyes that glared into him hatefully. A hiss like a viper filled his ears, and he saw a pair of white fangs appear and reach for his throat. No! Peacemaker shouted as his attacker threatened to bite his throat. A flash of azure light appeared between him and the shadowy figure, causing another roar of agony to echo in the abyss. But this time, the roar began to fade away into the distance. Freed from the grip of his attacker, Peacemaker looked up towards the individual in green light, who was descending towards him,
desperately reaching for his talons, trying to reach them. Peacemaker desperately ordered his body to move as he felt his body begin to grow weaker. Then, just when he felt his body was about to give out, Peacemaker felt his talons touch those of the individual above him, who took them. Ascending towards the gray light again, Peacemaker tried to see past the light that covered the one who had saved him. But it was too bright. Once they reached the gray light, Peacemaker felt as if his body had broken free of the ocean and into the air. Peacemaker snapped his eyes wide open and forced himself to sit up as he gasped for air. Before he could make sense of his surroundings, Peacemaker felt a wing cover him.
"It's okay, it's okay,"
came Cliff's voice from beside him as Peacemaker's gaze darted around his surroundings, startled. While Cliff sat to Peacemaker's left and Jaguar to his right, looking equally concerned as Cliff, Peacemaker saw Ermine, Alligator, and Hyena standing around him, all taking a deep sigh of relief. In front of him sat Tempest, who held one of his talons in her own, her eyes opening as if she had just been in just as deep a sleep as he had been, in the nightmare. But when he looked into Tempest's eyes, Peacemaker saw the Seawing's irises flash a faint green glow, which slowly dimmed seconds after she had opened her eyes. Everyone was silent in the cave for the longest moment, everyone staring at both Peacemaker and Tempest. Everyone had seen the glow in the Seawing's eyes. Peacemaker thought back to his nightmare, the abyss, the voice, and the figure in green light. The voice, it had sounded like Tempest. And the green light? "Tempest?" Peacemaker said, the Seawing lifting her head as she looked away from his talons, thoughtfully, and back up to his eyes with a concerned look. "Were you—" Tempest did not let him finish. Instead, she nodded. "I was," she answered softly. "How?" Peacemaker whispered, confused about everything. Tempest looked from Peacemaker to the rest of their winglet. Cliff, Jaguar, Hyena, Alligator, and even Ermine staring at Tempest. They wanted what Peacemaker wanted, answers as to what had happened. But for Peacemaker, it was different and personal. Sighing, Tempest squeezed his talons in her own. "Have any of you heard the story of the Somnus Dragons?" End of part 1.